Well, it's a real honor to be here, but I have to confess it's really intimidating to look across this arena and see a crowd like this. So I might stumble and bungle my way through, but I will do my best. I was here last year and also did one of your baccalaureates, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago. So it's thrilled to be back. Thank you, Pastor David, for having me when he wrote and asked if I would come back. I'm really honored to be here. This vision, the vision that brought this school into being years ago, is as needed as ever. And where we were staying in the hotel, many of your students here are working out there, and their grace and kindness was remarkable. The fact of the matter is we cover the globe. We travel all over the world. In fact, straight from here, I'm heading to England to speak in Birmingham, and from Birmingham on to Seoul, Korea. So we are wanderers, and we look like our passport pictures because that's how the fatigue builds up. But we notice very much courtesy and service as we travel, and the staff at where we were staying were just remarkable. So thank you so much. And so the two reasons for the success of our marriage. Number one, travel a lot because they always appreciate you when you come back. You know, they don't really see your faults that close. The second one was just before we got married, I was sitting around a campfire, and an elderly gentleman asked everybody to give us a word of advice. And we were listening to that advice. When the older gentleman's turn came, he just said, take 2 cars to church. I had no clue what that meant. But then I found out my wife's idea of time and my idea of time are 2 dramatically different perspectives. When the Lord returns, she's going to ask for 10 minutes more, if she could get that, please. And so, although we have taken 1 car to church because we didn't have to, it's been wonderful to have 47, well, when you think about nearly 50 years of your life, you know, where you've been so closely connected, one human being who can still laugh at anything you say when there's nothing you have left to say that you haven't already said before. But it's wonderful to be here with Margie and with my colleagues. And 2 of my colleagues are here on the platform, Vince and Joe Vitale. You'll have the opportunity of hearing them. Both of them are Oxford scholars and yet direct our Institute of Apologetics in Atlanta. You will love them. You will enjoy. Vince's PhD was in philosophy, and Joe in the field of Old Testament, basically with a dissertation, Is God Sexist? So it's an amazing combination of skills they bring. You'll hear them, and I hope at the weekend, I think Paula Ferris is going to be here. I was in New York over the weekend, had breakfast with her on Monday, and she has an amazing platform and an even more amazing faith. Some time ago, I was in an elevator in Pittsburgh, and there were some businessmen there, and planning for what businessmen plan to do every evening after the work is done. So one of them looked at me and said, I see you got a Bible in your hand. I said, yes, sir. I'm going to speak somewhere. He said, what are you speaking on? I said, I'm speaking on the problem of pleasure. And there was pin drop silence in the elevator. And then one of them said to me, I didn't know it was a problem. So I said, that tells you how big a problem it is when you don't even recognize what the problem is. People often ask me about the problem of pain. If you were to ask me, which is the number one question we hear as the defenders of the Christian faith on campuses or in public arenas, obviously the whole idea of struggle and pain. Someone has said virtue in distress and vice in triumph has made atheists of mankind. I know you've struggled with it. We've struggled with it. It's a very real, pardon the pun, but it's a thorny issue, the issue of pain. But I want to tell you, more people are sidelined and distracted by the reality of their choices in pleasure than ever in the struggle with pain. If you talk about pleasure, it's hard to know how to make those choices. What are the prior commitments you make that lead you into the particular moments where the choices have to be made? You don't make them ad hoc. You see, there's a difference between an opinion and a conviction. An opinion is something you hold. A conviction is something that holds you. That which directs you through the gripping of your very conscience. And Solomon is the one who wrote these words, and I would like to read them for you, coming to us from Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. And I'll hold on to that before it knocks anybody off. It'll stay there, I think. Here's what Solomon said. I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. You see, he's taken pleasure and juxtaposed it with the word good, to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is foolish, and what does pleasure actually accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born to my home, in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure for kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers and a harem as well, the delights of the heart of man. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all of this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all of my work, and this was the reward for all of my labor. Yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. To you, I want to understand a phrase here, because it just rolls over with the English words under the sun. What Solomon is really talking about is a Hebraism. If you're living in a closed system, if a transcendent input has been locked out, you don't have that direction coming, and you're in this hermetically sealed environment of the here and now. What is worthwhile to do in that kind of environment? How do we find out what is good if there's no input into your life and mine? And may I suggest to you that the fact is, this is a doctrine we need to understand. Because once upon a time, you had to go to places of pleasure. Now pleasure finds you and me. If I were to tell you what is the most surprising and now unsurprising question that we are asked, and it's coming from people younger and younger, 12, 13, 14, the question that is asked so often now, as a young man or woman walks up to the microphone, what is the purpose of my life? Why don't I have the right to commit suicide and take my life? And as one myself, who at the age of 17 attempted that, and remember so well lying in my bed in Delhi, staring at the ceiling, thinking how empty my life had been, how hopeless, and now even worse, failing not only to live, but now failing even to learn how to die. I had asked that question till I gave my life to Christ at the age of 17, having given a Bible that I had never owned before. So this question of pleasure is real. A young man just a couple weeks ago was talking to me on the phone, 18 years old, asked by his father to me, would you please call my son? He's struggling with suicide. So I picked up the phone and called this young man. And I asked him a simple question. I said, how long have you been struggling with something like this? I expected him to sort of stammer and stutter a bit and mutter around and think back. He said, it all began when I got into pornography. I said, really? He said, yes. I said, how old were you? He said, 8. That caught me completely by surprise. 8 years old, so you're talking about 10 years ago, just At the turning of this new century, this little guy got his hands into something that was wreaking havoc with his imagination and planting desires that no one person in this world could fulfill and satisfy, and therefore started struggling with taking his own life. A psychologist, I was mentioning last night speaking to the pastors here in town, that a psychologist has come out with a staggering statement, and here's what she says. She said the desire for suicide is the newest sexually transmitted disease. She doesn't mean literally, she means figuratively, because once you have enjoyed what was reserved by God for the years to come in the consummate expression of marriage, has now already been experienced by a little one who cannot process it, of having something without having any commitment to anybody. And so the desire to end it all, no future, no hope, it's a very real thing. One of my favorite essayists, F.W. Borum, to whom I'm indebted for this outline, by the way, not the talk itself, but the outline, because I'll leave with you 3 principles before we are done. But here's what he says in one of his essays. Laughter, merriment, and fun were evidently intended to occupy a large place in this world. Yet on no subject under the sun has the church displayed more embarrassment and confusion. One might almost suppose that here we have discovered an important phase of human experience on which Christianity is criminally reticent, a terra incognita which no intrepid prophet had ever explored, a silent sea upon whose waters no ecclesiastical adventurer had ever burst, a dark and airy country upon which no sun had ever shone. One preacher tells us of the devout old Scotsman who on Saturday night locked up the piano and unlocked the organ, reversing the process last thing on the Sunday evening. The piano is the sinner, the organ is the saint. He went on to tell us how some would wax merry at the person who regarded table games as a gift from heaven, while billiards he deemed to be a stepping stone to perdition. The play we condemn, it is anathema to us. The same play, or a vastly inferior one, screened on a film, we delightedly admire. One Christian follows the round of gaiety with the maddest of the merry. Another wears a hair shirt and starves himself into a skeleton. One treats life as all a frolic, another as all a funeral. We swerve from the Scylla of aestheticism to the Charybdis of asceticism. We swing like a pendulum from the indulgence of the Epicurean to the severities of the Stoic, failing to recognize with the author of Ecce Homo that it is the glory of the Christian faith that, rejecting the absurdities of each, it combines the cardinal excellencies of both. We allow without knowing why we allow. We ban without knowing why we prohibit. We compound for sins we are inclined to by damning those we have no mind to. We are at sea without chart or compass. Our theories of pleasure are in hopeless confusion. Is there no definite doctrine of amusement? Is there no philosophy of fun? There must be. There has to be. But you know, I find that kind of oxymoronic, that one phrase, is there no doctrine of amusement? You never think of doctrine as something that's liberating. You think of it as something that's binding. You think of amusement as that kind of escapade into which you can find some freedom. The fascinating thing about the book of Ecclesiastes and the indulgences listed is that it was written by a man who had it all, Solomon. It is told that every day in his palace nearly 14,000 people were fed. He led that nation from the middle of its history to its peak and was instrumental in the beginning of its decline. It's fascinating today. If you go to Jerusalem and you look up at where the harem of Solomon was, and you're looking up at it from the valley of Hinnom, which is the Hebrew for Gehenna, the valley of hell, where children were offered as sacrifices, the juxtaposing of the harem with the sacrifice of children couldn't be more ironic in our time as well. So what is it? how do we find answers? I will have time to just give you 3 principles today and leave them with you. You know, Solomon's fascinating reality was that the man had written over 3,000 proverbs, over 1,000 hymns. He was artistic. He was a horticultural expert. So he's not just talking about crass pleasure. He talked about the enjoyment of the arts, all of these which have such aesthetic fulfillment for us. When the Queen of Sheba came and met with him, she made the most extraordinary comment. She said, not even half has been told about what this man knows. And yet, at the end, he brought the kingdom to ruin, and really his own life completely had fallen apart. See, wisdom is not a theoretical knowledge of knowing what to choose. True wisdom is applying to do what is right. We hear so much politically today about right and left, right and left. We have forgotten there's an up and a down. It is that up and down that really gives us the GPS for the soul, the navigating of how we go through these maze of struggles. And take my word for it, when you traverse the globe and you're spending half your life in a hotel room, and you've done so for years, you know what the offerings are. You know what the seductions are. You know what the buzzwords are. You know what the allurements are. But you also know you had better have a pre-conviction and a commitment, or somebody is there to waylay you, because that's what the enemy of our souls is all about. And so I give you the 3 principles. All of them come to us really from the battlefield in real life. The first one comes to us from Judges chapter 7, and that one is this. Gideon is about to face a huge army with the Midianites. He doesn't know how he's going to handle this army. So he amasses his own young men to go and fight it. 32,000 of them, the best of the men. And God says to him, you've got too many. He says, how on earth can I have too many? Have you seen the Midianite army and their size? We're going to be encircled within minutes, and we're going to be slaughtered by them. God says, no, you've got too many. I want you to ask all of your soldiers which one of them is terrified, which one is fearful, and you remove them and go with the rest who are willing to take on this battle. 22,000 of them are gone. They say, Gideon, we just think this is a foolish battle. We just think we are not going to be able to fight it. So 22,000 have gone. He's left with 10,000. God says, you've still got too many. Now something happens that the soldiers are unaware of, what this test is really about. He takes them over to a river to bend down to have a drink of water as per the instructions of God. And God says to him, there are 2 ways in which they're going to be drinking this water. I want you to take those of them who drink the water in this particular way. The rest of them you can send back home to be with their families, to enjoy their families. Can you imagine what's going on in Gideon's heart? Saying, Lord, I sure hope they all drink in that particular way, or I'm done. I'm finished. So he's watching them carefully, and he's only left with what? 300. He says, you got to be kidding me, Lord. 300 against this Midianite army. And so the first principle I leave with you is this. Listen carefully, please. Anything that refreshes you, without distracting you from, diminishing, or destroying your final goal in life is a legitimate pleasure. Anything that refreshes you, without distracting, diminishing, or destroying you from your final goal in life is a legitimate pleasure. In other words, the most important hidden truth here is to establish what your final goal in life is. What is your purpose? Once you've established purpose, you will know what is refreshing, contrarily, what is distracting, diminishing, or destructive. How critical it is for you as young men and women in this stage of your life, with the strength of body and mind and education, to establish what that purpose is. Schools have missions. Businesses have missions. Do we have a mission as individuals? Someday seek God for a while, a day, a week, a month, whatever it takes you, and says, Lord, give me the articulation of what my purpose in life is. And once you've established that purpose, anything that refreshes you along the way, without destroying, diminishing, or distracting you in anyhow, is a legitimate purpose for you. I think this is a guideline and a marker that helps me to understand what it is that God really wants from me. You know, when I was a young teen and made my commitment, I remember my closest friend, who today happens to be my brother-in-law. We were at a meeting in a hill country in India, and there were about 40 or 45 of us sitting in that camp for that in the city of Missouri. And there we were listening to the message, and in the old terms that were used, we were given a call for total commitment, total dedication. You don't hear that too often now, but I remember hearing that. And the man who had done the speaking was actually the same man who had come to my hospital room with the Bible and led me to Christ. So here I'm listening to this message on total commitment. So I looked at my buddy next to me, and I said to him, what do you think? He said, let's go. So we both stood up, we both walked forward, we both knelt at the front, committed our lives to Christ in what we called a total dedication. When I got up, we saw most of the room had emptied and followed. There were a couple of young women who were still sitting, just like this in the back. I said, boy, that takes a lot of courage not to go with the flow. But I didn't think anything more of that and just said, well, maybe one day the right time will come. So my brother-in-law, who was a nuclear physicist later in life, then gave that up to become a pastor. He and I were visiting Delhi some years ago. And one of those gals, the older of the two, her mother phoned us and said, Ravi, I hear you're in town. I said, how did you know that? I said, well, there was an advertising and all of that. She said, I haven't seen you now for over 20 to 30 years. I said, that's right. She said, my daughter is very critically ill. Would you be able to come and visit and just pray with her? I said, where do you live in Delhi? I found out. I said, you remember Sundar? She said, yes. I said, Sundar's with me too. She said, bring him along. So we both arrived. We walked into the house. I wasn't expecting what I was going to see. I walked into the house and the mother welcomed us and she said, my daughter is upstairs. So I said, okay, we'll come upstairs. She said, she's bedridden, she can't move. I said, oh my word. So we walked up, Sundar and I stood by her bedside. She was like this, completely gnarled, and cheeks sunken and just looking up. And as soon as she saw Sundar and me, she just started to make strange sounds and almost choking on her own voice, but there were no words. And I just stared at her. I said to the mother, what happened? What happened here? And she said, well, we didn't have a happy home, we didn't have a happy family. And we got into an argument one day, and she locked herself in a bathroom door with some of the prescription medication. And this is all we have left. And I couldn't hold back the tears. But the picture that came to my mind was, as a young teen, when the option came, there was going to be a resistance. Now, I know there's never a one-on-one equation to everything, but I want you to know, well, there may be some unexplainable things. The question that came to my mind was this: what are you doing in this condition? What are you doing here? And so, to you young men especially, I want to say this: where your feet take you, what books your hands open, what your mind is entertained with, ask yourself before you go there, what am I doing here? What am I doing in this situation? What am I doing in this condition? You see, not everything that is fatal is immediate. Not everything that is fatal is immediate. So I would say to you, establish your purpose in life. Take a verse of Scripture, take a passage of Scripture, take a chapter, and etch it down somewhere, write it down to remind you, this is my goal, this is my purpose. John Wesley transformed the known world of his time. He preached 40,000 sermons in his lifetime. He traveled 250,000 miles by horseback. He worked with over 15 different languages, had over 600 different publications. At the age of 83, he was angry with his doctor because his doctor wouldn't let him preach more than 14 times a week. At the age of 86, in his journal were written these words, laziness is slowly creeping in. There's an increasing tendency to stay in bed after 5:30 in the morning. Now, to console myself, I said, what time did he go to bed? But one day he looked at his mother, Susanna, who raised 19 children. She herself came from a family of 29. Yeah. I have 5 grandkids. After they leave our home, Margie and I just stare at each other and say, what just happened here? Imagine having 19 children, but she raised 2 geniuses in John and Charles. And one day John Wesley was not a very tall boy, but traveled hundreds of thousands of miles by horse. They said he was the earliest version of the Sermon on the Mount, traveling all over the place. He looked at his mother and said, give me a definition of sin. Give me a definition of sin. She said, John, whatever weakens your reasoning, impairs the tenderness of your conscience, obscures your sense of God, or takes away your relish for spiritual things. In short, if anything increases the authority and the power of the flesh of the Spirit, that you become sin, however good it is in itself. Whatever weakens your reasoning, impairs the tenderness of your conscience, obscures your sense of God, takes away your relish for spiritual things. In short, if anything increases the authority and the power of the flesh over the Spirit, that you become sin, however good it is in itself. What a definition. What a product. Great changer of the world. So that's the first principle. Time's running out. Let me race through the second one. The second one comes when David is in Adullam and the Philistines are at Rephaim, and the Philistine garrison has occupied his home city of Bethlehem, and David is troubled. And he's sitting in his tent really moping over this whole thing. A handful of his best warriors come to him and say, David, you're down today. Can we do something for you? He said, I'm longing for a drink of water from my well in Bethlehem. I'm longing for a drink of water from my well in Bethlehem. Unknown to David, these guys in a cloak and dagger operation go under the radar of the Philistines, as it were, get to the well in Bethlehem, fill up that pitcher of water, bring it back to David, and they give it to him, and they come and he said, what's this? He said, David, this is the water from your well in Bethlehem. He says, how on earth did you guys get it? Said, don't worry about it. This is what we did. We went there. We've got it for you. David could have given the guys a hug and glug, chug, 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 chug. No. David is about to take a drink out of it. He said, no. Can't do this. You guys have risked your life to do this for me. I cannot enjoy something so selfish while you put your life at risk. And he poured it onto the ground. If David had done the same thing when he was tempted with Bathsheba years before, all of Old Testament history would have been different. If he just said, how can I do this to Uriah? I can't do this. It doesn't belong to me. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the principle that comes is any pleasure that jeopardizes the sacred right of another is an illicit pleasure. Any pleasure that jeopardizes the sacred right of another person is an illicit pleasure. We cannot use people for our own pleasure. We are meant to love people and use things. Instead, we've ended up using people and loving things. Always look at an individual as a person created imago Dei, person created in the image of God. So we have it. Establish your purpose. Any deviation from that turns out to be an illegitimate pleasure. Number two, any pleasure that jeopardizes the sacred right of another is an illegitimate pleasure, which brings you to the last one, which is the easiest to understand. Solomon says, if you find honey, eat just enough of it, too much of it, and you will vomit. Not the most aesthetic verse in Holy Writ, but he says, you find honey, take it, but too much, and you'll vomit. Here's the final one. Any pleasure, however good, if not kept in balance, will distort reality or destroy appetite. Any pleasure, however good, if not kept in balance, will distort reality or destroy appetite. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, lead a balanced life. There is a time to study, there is a time to have fun and to play. There is a time to pray, there's a time to walk up and just go and take a stroll for the enjoyment of the body, whatever. There's a time to go to the temple, there is a time to leave the temple. There is a time to laugh, there is a time to mourn. Find a life that is balanced, because that is the most difficult thing to attain in your life and mine. It's so easy to become a workaholic, so easy to drive at a pace that can ultimately be destructive to you and to me. Let me give you some applications and bring this to a close. Number one, all pleasure must be bought at the price of pain. All pleasure must be bought at the price of pain. The difference between false pleasure and true pleasure is this. For the true pleasure, the price is paid before you enjoy it. For the false pleasure, after you enjoy it. For true pleasure, you pay the price before, with sacrifice, with resistance. False pleasure, you pay the price afterwards and say, what have I actually done? Number two, the second principle I leave with you is this. Meaninglessness, says Chesterton, listen carefully, does not come from being weary of pain. Meaninglessness comes from being weary of pleasure. Meaninglessness does not come from being weary of pain. Meaninglessness comes from being weary of pleasure. And the last one I'll leave with you is this. The ultimate pleasure that you can find is when you know the discipline and the delight of worship, worshiping God in spirit and in truth. See, the Greeks created the university for what purpose? To find unity in diversity. That's why they created the universities. But the Greeks never found it. The Greeks never found it because all of their precepts were merely on virtue and harmony, abstract ideas. It was left to the Hebrews to remind us that we don't find it just in ideas, we find it in our relationship with God. He is the source of all truth. He is the source of all wisdom. And what you're really looking for ultimately is a relationship with your Creator, the one who made your DNA for Himself, and your heart will be restless until you find your rest in Him. Some years ago, an Olympic medalist came from miles away to visit me. Muscles like watermelons, bulging out of his body, sitting across the table. When I looked at him sitting at the table there, I thought to myself, goodness, I didn't know they made trousers this size. And so he's sitting across me with my unenviable musculature. I'm sitting there watching him. I looked at him and said, what brings you here? He said, I've heard your story on the air and I listened to you on the air. He said, Ravi, when I won the bronze medal and he named the Olympics, I was heartbroken. And the reason was, as the gun was about to be sounded, The one thought that distracted me was my question in my mind, is my father watching? Because he said, I have no relationship with my dad. And he told me I was wasting my time. Now I was about to win a medal. I would have won the gold, but for a moment I lost my concentration and I won the bronze. I said, it's not bad, to win the bronze. He said, no, that's not what I want to say. I'll give that bronze medal and everything away if I could have a relationship with my dad. I'd give all those medals away if I could have a relationship with my dad. This is the month you're focusing on relationships. All relationships can only be defined when your relationship with God has been defined. And that relationship dictates for you your choices in pleasure. One last thought. Time is a loan. You'll have to return it one day. Eternity is a gift. God will never take that back from you. Time is a loan. Eternity is a gift. Take this loan and use it in a way that you can return it to God with a delight in your heart, and what He has awaiting for you in eternity, eye has not seen, ear has not heard, neither has entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for them that love Him. Determine your goal. Don't get distracted. Find out how to lead that balanced life and never jeopardize the sacred right of another person. You will find pleasure to be fulfilling, and the greatest pleasure at His right hand are pleasures forevermore. Learn to bridge the head with the heart in worship, and that will bring you the fulfillment for which God has made you. My time's gone and I'm seeing red, so God bless you. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Pastor Ravi. Just a couple of quick moments together here. Talk to us about relationships. Take us a little deeper in as it relates to pleasure. It's great that we have Margie with us today. 47 years you've been faithfully married together, and so many people walk into a life where they've seen the very opposite of 47 years of faithfulness. A lot of our students come from broken homes. A lot of them have seen the very opposite, where someone got into marriage for pleasure and not for worship. And so what advice would you give someone, not just in marriage, but in their friendships? And so many people get in it for the wrong reason. They use people, like you were just saying. I love that quote when I was taking notes, using people and loving things. So they use people as a means to an end, instead of just an opportunity to worship. Give advice to us about how to apply our relationships and not let pleasure become the main purpose behind them.
Well, starting first of all with marriage, I think we live under the illusion that marriage is always walking through a row of daisies hand in hand, and you're just going to go and have a steak somewhere at the end of that walk. Let me give you two words that will define marriage. You're not going to be happy about this, but here it is. Hard work. Marriage is hard work. But if you do it right, you get the best returns there ever can be, because that hard work takes discipline and sacrifice. Somebody said this to me over the summer, and the longer I'm thinking about it, I believe she was right. I had used the word commitment, and a woman married for many years said, Ravi, I wouldn't just say commitment, I would say sacrifice. And David, as you well know, the longer I look at it, you sacrifice a lot along the way, but the returns are even greater. Don't ever marry with just a wish list of what you want. Make sure you also have a wish list of what you want to be and do and give. And I think that would be the choice that I would say to you. Men are drawn by the eye. Women are drawn by the ear. They hear some nice words. Well, he thinks I'm beautiful. He thinks I'm brilliant. He thinks I'm this. All that. He sounds like a poet to me. Boy, Shakespeare would be jealous of this guy's lyricism and all of that. I know how it is. I'm a father of 2 girls. I know what they were bringing. Look at this poetry, Dad. Look at how beautiful he says all of this. I said, it's okay. This is in the wooing stage. Wait to see how much poetry he gives you 5 years into the marriage. Now, my father-in-law was married for 60-some years. Every paycheck, he brought a dozen roses for his wife over all those years of married life, okay? He was released by the company he worked for during the oil crisis. He'd worked there 32 years. He brought the dozen roses with a note saying, this will be the last one. I don't expect a paycheck from here on. But before he died, I was talking to him, and he said to me, I'm afraid I haven't left enough money for Mama. So I said, Dad, you have. He said, how do you know? I said, I've talked to your accountant. That stunned him. I said, besides, Dad, even if you hadn't, we're here. We'll take care of her. He said, no, son, it was my duty. That word we don't like anymore, David. Yeah. You have a duty. You have a duty to your spouse. And that duty involves sacrifice. And he went silent for many days. My wife was by his bedside with 2 of her sisters and the mother. And he didn't say anything for several days till he opened his eyes and looked up to the ceiling. He was 85 then, and he just said, that's amazing, simply amazing. And then he looked at his wife of 60-some years and said, Jean, I love you. And he was gone. He'd done his duty. So I say to you, it's hard work. Do your duty and seek to serve, not just to get, and the returns will be far greater than you ever envisioned. Love is hard work.
Phenomenal. Yes, sir. So true. So if marriage exists ultimately in making you holy and not making you happy, but yet there are seasons in a commitment and in a relationship where you just feel like the drought just won't go away. The valley continues to get deeper instead of you finding yourself eventually coming out of it. What advice do you give to someone who says, I can't remember the last time that we were happy. I can't remember the last time in a friendship where it didn't feel like every time I got back in, there was not, I didn't leave more exhausted. What advice do you give to someone?
Yeah, and any simplistic answers would be disrespectful of the person and what they are going through. I was mentioning to the pastors last night, a young 14-year-old boy came up to me and made the comment. He said, in 11 days I turned 14. But in 11 days I have to make a decision between my father and my mother. And I just looked at him in a state of shock. At the age of 14, he was having to make a choice because the home was breaking up. And I put my hand on his shoulder, and I just didn't know what to say except call him by name and say to him, I hope and pray you don't have to lose either. But corrective measures are harder than preventive measures. And so preventive, I say to you, young men and women, have a disciplined devotional life, because that gives the window to your soul from God to speak to you and keep you to make repeated mistakes. Because the more the mistakes are repeated, you are building a wall of separation. And then how do you take that thick wall down? It's easier to take one brick down rather than build a whole wall. Believe me, I've seen people, once they've built that wall, I say, how did this happen? How did you let this happen for so long? So don't allow separation to fester. Don't allow that sense of distance to build and say, I'm going to wait till she says I'm sorry, or till he says I'm sorry. Your responsibility before God and my responsibility before God is simply this. Please tell me what I have done wrong, and I will say to you, I'm sorry for that. Here's what I think, but if I've not got it all, you tell me. And you have to know this is the wife or the husband of your youth. They gave up everything for you and walked the path of life with you. Don't let a handful of disappointments break up that initial love and trust. Love needs nurturing. Don't allow distance to be built. And by the way, that's true not just of marriage, it's true of your friendships too.
Yeah.
If you feel wronged by a friend, go over and sit down and say, look, I love you. I really want you as a friend. I want to be a friend to you. Swallow your pride.
Yes,
Humility is the first strength for any relationship. If you're not humble of heart but conceited of heart, you will run into wall after wall after wall. Just own up to your fragility and your finitude and say, I'm going to work harder of this because I need your friendship. I want to have this relationship with you, and please forgive me for what I have done. I love you too much to allow this to separate us. In the end, you will be a better person for it.
Yes, sir. Tomorrow is Mental Health Awareness Day globally, and you've been very transparent and honest and vulnerable about being suicidal. You drank poison when you were a teenager, and in a hospital the Lord delivered you. But you've been able to weather through that, and obviously God's done incredible things in and through your life, and you've turned tragedy into testimony. But there are those in this room who deal with mental illness, deal with suicidal tendencies, deal with dark hours of depression, and it has not been easy for them to just stop drinking the poison of the world. Talk to us about the balance of medication and the balance of finding a way out. So many people do medicate with pleasure and find themselves going even further in, but give us a balance of that and some advice to someone who maybe today is dealing with mental illness and maybe even suicidal thoughts, but can't just decide, I'm going to get out of it.
Right. My brother is a very fine medical practitioner in Canada, David. He's chairman of the pain management department at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. He's a specialist in this. And Ramesh and I talk often. He used to be a surgeon, and he went off that in order to pain management. He said because short-term solutions were often long-term problems. And the most problematic issue was, he said, the kind of medication that a person would be put under, and then all kinds of chemical changes take place and you're not able to handle it. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I want to say this. With mental health issues, please take it seriously. If you find yourself going for unexplainable reasons into dark periods and so on, you need a good psychologist and a good counselor. Your problem may not be spiritual. Your problem can very much be physical, neurological, and we sometimes simplistically dismiss everything away. This is a spiritual problem. Not so. I've met a lot of people who struggle deeply with psychological issues, traumas from youth, traumas from childhood, the thumbs up and thumbs down in life that gets you down. I knew a father whose daughter was very young and had been on some medication and jumped from a high building in Hong Kong and killed herself. The father was just shattered by it for not taking enough time to take his daughter to medical practitioner. Please take your down moments seriously and get the best kind of medical advice. And naturally, you want to open up to a friend, you want to talk to a friend, and then find counselors who can at the same time spiritually help you. They're not contrary to each other. We are individuals, which literally means we are indivisible. We cannot be broken up and compartmentalized. There's the spiritual dimension of it, there's the neurological and psychological dimension. See, my issue was different, David. I was a failure. I had reason to be down. I was not doing very well. I was despondent and discouraged and I was living for sports. I wasn't working hard in my studies, and in India, you don't get away with that. You have to perform well in studies. So to me, there was no hope. Where there is the death of hope, the only alternative is the hope for death. Not if you know Jesus. He is the author of hope. He's the author of life. Imagine when he talked to the woman at the well and he looked at her and said, I know who you are. 5 broken marriages. Imagine how embarrassed she must have been in that culture, even more so. And here the Messiah was giving her hope and a drink of living water and made her the first evangelist to the Samaritan people. So don't ever lose hope. Don't ever lose hope. Jesus is the author of all hope and all meaning. He transformed the most downcast and helped change history. He knows your DNA.
Yes.
He knows who you are. He loves you with an immense value and an immense care. He can enter your life and transform you. Don't make impulsive decisions. Time will show you how God will do the healing. Time doesn't heal, but time reveals to you how God does the healing. That's why your friendships and your devotional life are critical, so that you're not under the sun, but you know there's the vertical input and the horizontal love of somebody who cares for you, for who you are, regardless how good you may be feeling on that day. Be an encourager. Be a Barnabas. If you sense somebody down, put your arm around them and pray for them. Make yourself one who will be a healer and not a hurter. And don't be a hurter, because you may never know what you are pouring on very fresh wounds. God bless you, and be an answer, not a problem creator in this society in which we live.
Amen. Hey, before we conclude, you've done. You're always pouring out. You're always serving so many faithfully. It is really a sacrifice what you and Margie go through, being away from each other. You're leaving here and not even getting to go home to Atlanta, going across the ocean. How can we bless you, and how can we be praying for you? We want to pray over you. And Margie, I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, if you'll come out as well. But what is a prayer request right now in your life? And Peter, brother, will you come up and pray for them? Peter's a family friend and a part of their board. I'm going to ask you just to pray over this couple. But what is a prayer request for you right now?
Victoria are here, have been very, very good friends, and one of their daughters graduated from here, and we're just delighted to have these friendships. David, I'm 73 now. Margie's much younger, and so we're enjoying life together, but the enemy of our souls is always trying to attack. Always. He will never spare you when you're doing something for the kingdom. The most important thing you can pray for me is for our children and our grandchildren. That's what Margie would say. And please pray for health and strength while we travel. Actually, I do get a few hours to go and change my suitcase in Atlanta and then fly to Birmingham from there. But those are just a few hours. I won't be seeing anybody. So pray for our kids, our grandkids, and pray for our health and wisdom and strength. Yes. And thank God for this lady who for 47 years committed herself to stand beside me no matter what. She's been amazing. Without her, I would never have made it. She takes all my bookings, and I will stop there before she corrects me. God bless you, and thank you so much. Yeah.
Let's put our hands towards this precious couple. Come on, let's put our hands towards them. And Peter, if you would, just pray.
Please pray with me. Father God, we are so privileged to have heard from you today, from this precious man. Father, this man has tirelessly walked the globe, proclaiming your truth in so many dark places. And here, our brother has gathered here today to tell us about you and to give us insights and wisdom. Father, I pray that the seeds that have been planted among everyone here would bring forth a harvest, that none of us would take for granted the truth that was proclaimed on this stage here today. Father, I pray that you would walk with this man, that you'd give him wisdom even beyond the wisdom he has now, that you'd continue to pour into his life and into his family. Father, the sacrifice that this man has made, I pray that would be placed at your throne, and that we would all see the harvest that comes from the truth that is proclaimed. Make his travel easy, make it light. I pray that the absence that he has from his family, that you would somehow, some way, miraculously fill those gaps, that where there are needs in his own family, Father, that you would fill those needs. Continue to bless him, Father, and allow him to be that example to us and to so many around the globe. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Peter. Hey, we'll see you tonight at Campus Community. One more time, can we thank the Zacharias family? They're amazing and such dear friends. God bless you. You're dismissed. We'll see you tonight, 6:30.